titled this talk A Sponger for Life because we have this small subset of dolphins in Shark Bay, Australia, so I came kind of along the same latitude almost, except there are no direct flights between Shark Bay and Brisbane, but to come over here from a field season over there where I've been studying the dolphins there for 25 years now. And a subset of the dolphins there use sponges as tools. And sponges, by the way, are animals, primitive albeit, but they are using other animals to help them find prey. So I'm going to tell you about how and why dolphins use tools and why some of them don't use tools. So in this talk, just to give you an overview, I'm going to talk about some background on the Shark Bay dolphins, and this is in Western Australia, by the way. I'll show you a map, and the history of tool use in Shark Bay and what we've learned about it so far, and then the sort of different domains of explanation that help us understand how and why dolphins use tools. Okay. And then a little bit at the end. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with this map, but Shark Bay is over here, and a more detailed, we'll work on the Parent Peninsula and in the eastern Gulf of the Parent Peninsula, and that's our main study area. And the little dot there, the red dot, is monkey Maya, which is known for dolphins that come into the beach, but they're not the main part of our study. It's only a few dolphins that come into the beach and interact with tourists, and the rest we study, in addition to the provision dolphins. But and this just shows you in more detail the areas where dolphins have been seen sponging or carrying sponges around. Okay, those little yellow dots, and those are, as I'll explain, mostly in deep channels. Okay. So a little bit background on the method so you understand where the data come from. We started the project in 1984. I actually joined it in 1989. 1988. And we do two things. We do both surveys of the animals, some systematic, some not, and what we call follows. And surveys are if you go out in your boat from our camp, our base camp, and you run into three groups, and you record who's there, exactly where you are by GPS, and what they're doing, and other systematic details. And then we also do something called focal follows, which is represented by these lines where we're looking for a particular individual, and so I focused a lot on the females and their calves, and so I'll look for a particular mother-calf pair, and I know where they hang out, and I'll go and find them and just follow them around and record who they join and leave with and what they're doing today. For anywhere up to 9 hours, but typically we follow them for about 3 hours, excuse me, before looking for somebody else. We identify dolphins by the dorsal fins. We don't tag them or mark them or get in the water with them. And they're all pretty distinctive. The calves are less distinctive, but they get banged up pretty soon by sharks and other dolphins. And we can also roughly age them if we don't know their exact birthday. We know basically all the birthdays since about 1982 because the small animals we could judge, but you see this is a female actually. She's getting quite a few speckles down here. They do speckle with age, and that allows us to, because we know the rate of speckling for known-aged animals, we can apply that to animals who we don't know the ages of. And we've collected demographic, reproductive, behavioral, ecological, and we have quite a bit of genetic data also for over 1,500 dolphins. Okay, so many people say dolphins are in the pod, and that's not true. I mean, the biggest dolphins, which is the killer whale, are in a pod in that they have a stable group membership and individuals don't really join or leave the pod. But dolphins are a little bit more like humans, that they have a really flexible social system where individuals to join and leave on a fluid basis. As an example, this would be a very large dolphin group if we were all dolphins. I couldn't recognize you or remember your names unless you had little cutout fins on your heads, but that's my problem. And so this is how we can recognize many of them on site. If we have doubt, we take a picture. But anyway, this would be a very large dolphin group. And it's a unique group. We'll never be together again for the rest of our lives. And we don't even think about this. All day long, you are in unique group compositions and that we join and leave. And dolphins do something very similar to that, where they have their friends and associates, so you get together for lunch with a good friend, but or you spend more time with your family. And dolphins do the same thing, but they also have a very, very large network, and they join and leave groups in various combinations throughout the day. So the average group size is about 4 to 5 dolphins typically. And the males are in these alliances, and these are pairs and triplets that are represented by the ovals. And these alliances are males that cooperate to keep a female with them and keep other males away. And they're in triplets or pairs, but the line is drawn around these because they're multi-level, in that pairs and triplets of males will also cooperate to help each other keep their respective females, and they can get into up to 14 animals in larger groups of males. They cooperate for the length of our study. Occasionally a male gets booted out, but basically they're very stable, and so these males stay together for life. And so when people ask, are dolphins monogamous? I said, yeah, like these two guys, very monogamous with each other, but in other ways, no. Okay. The females form loose kin-based networks and also have a very large network. The males do too, but they are always going into groups with each other as pairs and triplets. But the females, it's much more flexible and literally fluid. The females first calve at 11 to 12 years of age, and they live into their early 40s. They nurse their offspring for a minimum of 3 years, but it can go as late as 9, and it's pretty variable. Okay, so that's a bit of background on that. The other thing I wanted to say before I got into the tool use was that dolphins have, especially in Shark Bay, notorious hunting behaviors. Up here's one of my favorites. It's a female named Wedges. She's the only one who catches giant golden trevally, and they're like a meter this big. She catches them in deep water, and it takes her an hour to break it up in shallow water, and she catches one every 2.6 hours. And so she's a big girl, and she eats a lot. And everybody comes around and watches her do this, and nobody else catches these giant fish except for her. And I'm still waiting 13 years later to see her daughter do it. I was just at a calf, but if I follow her enough, I think she's going to do it. But this is a beaching behavior. This is reggae. And she's going after a mullet, which it looks like she's missing right here. But they hydroplane. This has been filmed a lot by the BBC in the Shallow Earth series, and also Dolphins of Shark Bay, which came out last year. And so they hydroplane and basically chase mullet onto the beach, and they nail them off and onto the beach. Reggae, interestingly, is also our most successful female, that she's just had a lot of surviving calves. Another behavior you may have read about, we call shelling, and that's with like trumpeter shells, but also they do it with baler shells. This is a young female, her name's Radical, and her mom's Groovy. And don't ask me about how to come up with these names, but spent a lot of time in the water, so just seemed right at the time. Anyway, she chases a fish, or the fish are found inside these shells, and then they lift them up out of the water and drain the water out. And you can see she's just gotten the fish. This was after about 50 other photos of her, but you see the fish in her mouth. We don't know what they're going after. It's a very, very heavy shell, so it's clearly difficult for them to do. The sponging, which I'm going to talk about, that's when the female's wearing a sponge. And then what we call shag robbing, which is not as bad as it sounds. But we call them shags over in, we called cormorant shags in Western Australia. Some say that's our problem over there, but the cormorants are called shags, and there's a young female named Sequel, and what she does is when a shag catches a fish, she just speeds up at some distance and just like slams into the shag and makes it drop the fish. So, and then eats it. And we've seen her do this multiple times, but we've never seen anyone else do it. So this is just a sort of range. There's actually 20 more tactics that we see them do, but these are the ones that are visually most interesting. Okay, so on the sponge tool used in Shark Bay, what do we know about it so far? It was discovered in the 1980s by Rachel Smoker, who heard from a fisher about a dolphin that had a large growth on its nose and didn't look so good. And she didn't believe him, and then she went out to that location and she saw a dolphin with this big growth on the nose, but then she knows the growth changed and eventually figured out that these were sponges. We know that it's vertically transmitted pretty strictly from mother to offspring. We know of no one who's become a sponger, as we call them, who was not born to a sponger. It's strongly female biased, and so most of the spongers are female, which I'll talk a little more about. And it's a very tiny proportion of the population. It's about only 4% of the dolphins in our main study area. So only some individuals do this. The predominant hunting tactic that they use and others do not. We really don't have part-time spongers. We just have, if you do it as your primary hunting tactic. And they tend to spend a lot of time doing this, day in and day out. We haven't followed them at night. They may do it at night, I don't know. But they tend to be very solitary as well. The females that sponge spend a lot of time alone, and the males that sponge actually spend more time alone than other males. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of background. So what are they doing with these sponges? Actually, let me back up for a second. I should just tell you I'll describe what they do and then that'll give you a sense. So these basket sponges, and they put them over their beak, and they've torn them off the seafloor, and then they go along the seafloor with the sponge, and they scare up prey, and then they drop the sponge because it's covering their beak. They can't eat anything with the sponge on. And then they grab the fish, swallow it because they're small, and I'll show you. I can't show you actual footage of spongers hunting the behavior because no one's filmed it yet. But they swallow it, and then they go back and get their sponge, and then just do it again. So they use it to protect the beak, basically, along the substrate. And they do this in deep channels, about 10 meters. That's deep for us. Actually, Shark Bay is very shallow. So we've been able to see them from the surface, what they're doing. Filming it underwater is pretty challenging. So what I said is, it seems, so in terms of the how it happens, that they really are sort of born to sponge in the sense that their mothers, they become a sponger only if their mother is. And we have we do also know of several individuals who did not become spongers, 8 offspring, which are mostly male, but we also have some additional males, we don't know who the mother is, who are spongers as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these different domains of explanation, including the mother, the ecology, the development, and also a little bit about their social networks. One of my students has been focusing a lot on the ecology. So we know, I'll come back to the mother a little bit later, but we know it's only through the mother that they seem to learn this behavior. Lots of other individuals are exposed to it and don't do it. So my student got very interested in looking at the habitat, and so we started diving in the bay and to look at what's down there. This is just showing you the common sponge they use, the Chynodictyum, on the seafloor, and you can see it's basket shaped, and they just tear it off at the base. So that's kind of what that looks like. And they've filmed, they do detailed video, these sort of randomized transects of the substrate, and then in addition to video, we have also been sponging ourselves using a pole and a basket sponge at the end of the pole. And then we see what we scare up, and we try to actually trap whatever we scare up, and we also trap whatever fish we can get and to look at them. Mostly what they use is the Chynodictyum, and most of the photos you'll see here are from that, but there's this very robust, and sometimes they're giant sponges that actually almost cover their head. we don't see this very often, but it's a very strong sponge, and it's also very hard to get up because it sits flat, and we have no idea how they get the tool still. Because they come up pretty quickly with these sponges, we have no idea how they do it. They use their sponges for anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, and every indication we have so far is that the young dolphins are wasteful with their tools and drop them too quickly. You know, they're just not ecologically minded or sustainable, but you know, only so much you can teach a kid. So, and then there's other sponge tools that we've seen them rarely use that we know disintegrates when it's exposed to air, so we make a very good tool. And others that we don't know that much about, but we're working with a sponge biologist. There aren't that many, but there's one in Western Australia. So she's helping us identify the different sponges. We have to take clippings to get them identified. It's basically genetically, but some of them are really different visually. A bit about their development. I'm very interested in the sex difference in sponging and why it would occur, because this clearly seems to be a socially learned behavior, and why males don't do the behavior very much. So in that, like, when do they start to sponge? It's a difficult behavior and they do it later than all the other hunting tactics except for beaching, which is also difficult. We think we want to look at if there's a sex difference in the age of sponging onset, and is it related to something like diving capacity? In lots of mammals, males mature more slowly than females, so maybe females are just better divers. This is a deep water activity, and so maybe they just learn it while they're with their mothers and males don't. And so we want to look at the physiological differences in diving between males and females, see if there's anything we could find there. Or if there's a sex difference, maybe males aren't around their mothers so much, and so they don't pick up the behavior that way. Or is there a difference for the males that do sponge? Is it different than the amount of time that the females sponge? So, of the 32 offspring that we know the outcome of whether they sponged or not, the sex difference is pretty clear. It's 50% of the males, which is higher than we previously reported, and 88% of the females have adopted it. So it's still a strong sex difference, but it's not as strong as we always thought. And the pictures always seems to change. But let me just walk you through this a little bit. And this is sort of the sponger, partly the sponger for life photo, but so this is the first year of a dolphin's life, and there's the females over on this side and the males over on this side. And this is when they're not sponging, for the sort of violet here and the green for the males. And then we have one precocious sponger here, started sponging in the second year of life, but basically it's year 3, or in some cases unknown. But if you're going to start to sponge, as these males did, they all started year 3, just like the females. So there's no sex difference in the onset. If you're going to start sponging, you do it by the 3rd year of life. Some of the males who were born to spongers, and we only saw them sponge once. And actually, I just added this one because I just saw it a few weeks ago. It was the first time when we watched this one, Guppy. We watched him for a long time, and he never did it. And then the first time, you know, after so many years, you know, and he's 10 years old, and the first time I've seen him with a sponge. So maybe some of these males do it really rarely because we're not watching them 24/7, but it's clearly a big difference between these two groups. Once they start, they don't seem to stop. And in fact, in the 1980s, Rachel Smoker discovered 5 females. Well, they only thought there were 5 sponging. One sponged to her death until her death in 1998, and the other 4 are still alive and have been sponging now for almost 30 years. So clearly, once you start, that's it. So that raises the issue: what is going on here with, especially with these males? Because these are the same mothers for these guys, just with a different son. So it's not the particular mother, because these mothers will have one sponging male offspring and another one who doesn't. Okay, just in the amount of time they spend sponging, we don't have a lot of data. The males that we saw sponge the 3rd year, we just saw it once. So it could be the amount, although our sample is really small, so I couldn't get, it looks like there's a sex difference, but the sample sizes were too small for observing them in a lot of detail. So we haven't actually found, even though it looks really different, a sex difference in sponging. So the females are these triangles, diamonds on the top, and the males are the squares. And there's a lot of variation. These are out of only animals who actually became what we consider spongers, which only means having been seen sponging at least twice. Okay, so what's going on with the males? Well, I mentioned that they're in alliances, and these begin in the juvenile period, and we know they last a lifetime. Again, the same males have been together for 30 years as well. And we think because the sponging is only in these channels, so it requires specific commitment to a habitat, and it seems to also require a lifetime commitment. And so we think that this commitment, basically in foraging time and everything else, would interfere with the male's ability to move around widely and form alliances and move widely to find females. Otherwise, they'd be stuck in the channels with the same sponger females all the time. So, who they're probably related to. So. That wouldn't be good for them. So this doesn't explain why some males seem to copy their mothers and others do not. And so one of the things I've become interested in is how do other males maybe influence these males who don't sponge during the calf period, or does the mother have some influence? Like, you know, this male, your sponge material, I'm going to show you how to sponge. Another male, she just says, you should just join an alliance because I think it'll be better that way. So we don't really know how it gets decided. So we thought that there might be this differential maturation in diving ability, or the mother might change her behavior when she has a sponging or an offspring that becomes a sponger or not. Or that the male associates that who the young calf sees. He's got to sort of decide by age 3. He's got to make this very big decision about his life. And, you know, is it based on who he sees around him, other spongers or not? So, first, there's no difference in dive. We record dive bout duration, how long they're down diving for, and we can't find any sex difference whatsoever. So males can dive just as well as females can. So that doesn't seem to be it. And again, just after the second birthday or in the 3rd year of life is when they start sponging. But dive bout duration does go up, so it might be a limitation for how much the calves. This is just how long they're down for in minutes. So it goes up until age 5, and then it's the same. So their real diving maturation occurs around here. And it is interesting because right after weaning is when we see their sponging behavior go way up. And it could be because their diving capacity is now good enough. But that would go for both sexes. We did not find a difference in how much time they spend close to the mother. So males weren't hanging around their mothers close any more than females. There's just no sex difference there. And mothers of sons don't sponge less or spend less time sponging than mothers of daughters. But we did find something interesting, even with our little sample, was that mothers with sponging offspring spent more time sponging than when their offspring didn't become spongers. So in other words, for some reason, mothers were sponging more with some offspring than others, and that helped, you know, predict who would become a sponger. So if their offspring sponges, the mother spends almost 60% of her day sponging. If her offspring doesn't become a sponger, she's spending almost half as much. I mean, a little more than half as much, about 35% of her day sponging. So that's a big difference. So I was surprised to find that. So I don't know what the mother's going on. Maybe she is kind of directing what her calf is going to become. How about the males? Well, we have a small sample of just these 12 calves, so it's tiny, the number of males that became spongers and didn't in that group. So when these are the sponger calves, and the blue bar is like how many non-sponger immature males they were exposed to, like other young males. And the other is how many sponger immatures, these are all males here, how many sponger other young males. So in other words, if you're a young male dolphin and you're thinking, mom sponges all the time, and oh, there's a young male that I might join up with, and he sponges, then maybe it seems normal. But if you see a lot of other males around who don't sponge, that you might end up in an alliance with, or might be your buddies, then maybe you won't pick up the behavior. And the variance is, the variation here is pretty large, but the males who didn't become spongers seem to have had a lot more males around, so we're pursuing this a little further if we get a little more data. So we think basically these males are saying, oh, there's lots of males out there and they're not doing what mom does, so not going to do it. So that's what we think might be going on. But it's below our the p-value is a little larger than we want it to be, but that's how it goes. And so I want to talk a little bit about the cultural issue, because it is tool use and it's passed on. And one of the things I'm also very interested in is we think it's pretty clear it's a socially learned behavior, although we don't know the exact mechanisms. We don't see mothers teaching their offspring, but they're exposed to it for thousands of hours, and lots of others see it and don't do it. So we can discuss the evidence for social learning, but and it spreads vertically. But I was also very interested in, do spongers actually prefer each other? Because there's lots of non-spongers that they hang out with too. So this is two young females they joined, they'd been sort of sponging for our part, and they came over to bow ride at the boat. But so they are in these, we can control for location because we know a lot about where these animals spend time. We collect a lot of GPS data on their location, so we can control for how much time they're in the same place, and also look at their relatedness and how much time they spend together. So basically we're interested in, do spongers prefer to hang out with each other? They don't sponge together, that's a solitary behavior. So it's like, if you're all here, your affiliation is driven by, you've come from, you're alumni from University of Queensland. So you've all gathered together and meet each other because you're all from University of Queensland. So in a sense, that's driving your association. And so similarly, this has never been tested before, to my knowledge, with non-human animals, because when they've socially learned a behavior, it's everywhere, it's because they were in the group. This is, do they group because of the behavior? Like, we're grouped because of your behavior of going to University of Queensland. So that was what I was interested in, a complex way of saying it. For this we did social network analysis, and we took only dolphins that basically completely overlap in their home range, the animals who spend a lot of time in the channels and don't sponge. And we looked at basically their networks. Some of you are probably familiar with this, but the connections between them. And what we used are all weighted, like how much time they spend together, so how much time this individual with this individual. And the nodes are just basically the different dolphins. So we look at how much time together, and we adjust that for how much time they're seen and other factors. And looked at males and females also together and separately. So we had 36 spongers and 69 non-spongers. Just to show you, what we took was the center of their home range. They're called centroids. So we took the center of all the spongers that we had a lot of data on, and we drew sort of a polygon around it. And then we only took those that really completely overlapped, that were in the same area as the spongers. And in fact, all these individuals had associated with spongers as well. And what we found was pretty interesting. I can't tell you all the results, but one thing is that the spongers were more cliquish. So what this means is, it's called the clustering coefficient, but what this means, it's just visually shown here, if this was the spongers and this was the non-spongers, meaning like everyone that you're connected to is also connected to each other. So that's a clique. So the spongers did spend more time together with each other, with individuals who spent more time with each other as well. So, and there were other interesting findings, and there were other suggestions that we have very clear data that the spongers do prefer to spend time together. Just to give you a little bit of it, I'm not showing you all the data from this, but some of it, because some of it's banned because it's coming out. So there's an article coming out on this nature of communication, so there's a press ban on some of it, so you can't put some of this online for a few days. These are clusters. This is the 105 dolphins that live in the channels, and these are sort of the large circles here are spongers, and the small ones are non-spongers. And this is a larger network of 439 dolphins. And actually, spongers only associate with these two, or in these two clusters. But there, you can see there's lots of other individuals in their network, so they're not just with each other. But just to show you sort of more what it's like. So out of these 105 individuals, you could break these down into 4 different clusters represented by color. And you can also see the thickness of the lines, meaning, you know, these, like this little cluster here that has these very strong connections, that would be a group of males. You could spot it immediately if you know, and that would be males. Because they spend so much time, and this would be males. You could pick it out by the strength of those connections. But in the yellow cluster, for example, there are 26 non-spongers, and there were only 2 spongers that sort of fell out in this cluster. And they were both really old spongers, and they seem to have lost their sponger pals. They mostly are alone. They were over 30 years old. 1 old male, 1 old female. If you look at the red cluster, there were 18 non-spongers and 16 spongers. So a lot of the spongers are in this cluster, but so are a lot of non-spongers, including a couple of the juvenile spongers that are still also hanging out with females, but also some of their non-sponging male friends. The green cluster has 10 sponging females that are all, 10 spongers that are all female. All these large circles here are females. And 10 non-spongers that are just member of one alliance. So these small dots in this are just males. So it really divides up cleanly that way in that cluster. And then this one, which is also interesting, it's the blue cluster is all male, with 5 male spongers and 15 non-sponging males. And then 3 young adult females who I think were only seen because they were being consorted with the males constantly because they're young and they haven't had their first offspring yet. When they have offspring, I'm betting that they will move to the other clusters. But now, since the males are with them a lot. So I hope that gives you a sense of sort of what their relationships are like, but this also means that the spongers, by hanging out together, have an opportunity to share information about where spongers are and where good sponging locations and a good place to find sponges and that sort of thing. That's pretty much what those networks look like. So the mother obviously has a tremendous influence. She spends thousands of hours sponging and brings her calf to sponge habitat where they're also going to meet other sponge associates or not. And that we think that she might alter her sponging and maybe her associations depending on the calf. I'd love to be able to interview the mothers and ask them how they might change their behavior. We've spent a lot with the ecology and in terms of the channel habitat and the current, and there's lots of basket sponges there and lots of these barred sand perch without the swim bladder, and it's a very cluttered substrate, so everything kind of fits the picture we expected. The development, I think we're still working on that. We know the onset is probably related to diving ability, that they've kind of continued to increase and seem to get to some critical mass, but it's not their maximum diving ability. And there's no sex difference in that, but we also know it seems to be a lifetime commitment. And so we're interested in the other factors on exposure to males who don't sponge, and maybe who they perceive as future alliance partners might have an influence. So we're still working on the developmental picture. We have quite a bit of data, which I didn't show you all of it, but that there's a post-weaning preference for spongers for other spongers, even controlling for location and other factors. Particularly among females, it's not clear with the males. And we think that this reinforces the behavior even further. So that basically gives you a pretty complete picture as we have to date on what is happening with the sponging. And I have lots of people to thank. Most of my, as Bill said, most of my funding has been by the NSF, and I make assistance where sponges sometimes. and it's a great place to work, and we have much more to discover yet, so I'm happy to take questions. Thanks.